Hello everyone, it's Kirsten and
Hi, I'm Julie.
And we're here from the Santa Lucia Conservancy. We're going to be taking you on a field trip today, focusing on what the Native Americans were doing many, many years ago in the fall.
And when you join us on a live class, we're going to look carefully at certain plants and talk about how they used each plant to provide some essential need that they had.
Before European explorers arrived in California, the native people lived in thousands of separate groups, and the Ohlone lived along the coast from northern San Francisco down through Monterey Bay and into northern Big Sur.
This map is super cool. It shows the whole central part of California. So way down here we have the Big Sur area, and it goes inland to the coastal mountains and up to San Francisco. And every written word that you see on that map is the name of a Native American tribe. And we could even call them a tribelet, because there were only about 200 to 500 people in each tribe. That's like the teeniest, tiniest town. So now we're going to look close up to the territory of the Rumsen, the tribe that lived here in Carmel Valley. So here's the Monterey Bay. Every circle is where historians have figured out that there was most likely a village. And the village where we teach our classes was right where the Carmel River meets the little creek, Potrero Creek. It's called Chukutnut.
Wouldn't it be fun to go back in time and look at this beautiful place that we live?
Ohlone villages had temporary encampments that they used for collecting food throughout different seasons. For example, acorns, berries, and other things that they needed for their everyday life. And both their permanent and their temporary homes were usually dome-shaped, made from tules that were woven or bundled into mats. But also, in our redwood forest, they would collect bark and wood framing to make sturdier cone-shaped shelters that were better for winter weather. Okay, Mishistuch, Kain Karakt, Linda Yamani. Hello, my name is Linda Yamani. I'm standing here next to the Carmel River near the ancient Rumsen village site of Chukutnut. My Rumsen Indian ancestors lived here for several thousand years, getting all the things they needed for a good life from the land around them. Think about it. They must have been really good at their jobs to have lived here for so long. I mean, thousands of years is a long time, right? Basketry is very important to us. A basket represents so many things, and it really grounds us, because if you're a basket weaver, you learn about the plants. You become friends with the plants. You learn the cycles. You learn not with words, but you learn through experience.
The Rumsen were unique that they didn't have wooden structures and wooden plank boats. They had a wandering life, which led to having to have things that they could carry. So their houses were made from tule. They could construct them within a few hours. Their boats were light, made of tule, and they could carry them. And the mats that they sat on and the baskets that they carried all enabled them to move through the seasons. The preparation of acorn mush was a woman's daily occupation, almost as regular and predictable a part of life as the rising of the sun. Time itself was measured by the oaks. The acorn harvest marked the beginning of the new year. One harvest followed another in a great yearly cycle. There were trips to the oak groves for acorns, to the hills and meadows for seeds and roots and greens, to the marshes for ducks and geese, to the rivers for salmon, and to the seashore for shellfish, fish, and marine mammals, birds, and bird eggs. There were also trips to quarries where the men collected minerals and stones, and still other trips for milkweed, fiber to make different tools and baskets, and medicine.
It is so exciting to see what can be made from a plant. When we're out on our walks, we see these plants. We see Thule growing in the wet places. Dogbane is a beautiful wildflower. You'd never guess it from looking at that stick. Milkweed is a plant that the butterflies use, especially the monarch butterflies. It's a pretty flower. And stinging nettle, we know we don't want to touch it because it really has stingers. So the Native Americans took these plants and they stripped strings. You've probably pulled a string off a plant before. So they pulled the strings off, and then, oh my gosh, so much work to take those little strings and then twist them together for kind of like braiding. So that was a huge amount of work. And it was actually one of the men's jobs. So even though the men were considered to be the hunters, the women the gatherers, all this rope and twine was used to make nets and other things that were used for hunting. So you can imagine how important it is to have some kind of string. And it took miles and miles and miles of this string to make something like a net to catch birds or to catch deer. We're at the Discovery Center at Palo Corona Regional Park. We're on a field trip, so we can show you some cool things. In the Rumsen culture, men and women had very different responsibilities. Men were the hunters and women were the gatherers. So as a boy, you might learn to hunt, maybe using a small rodent like a dusky-footed wood rat or a gopher or a ground squirrel.
Men carried quivers of bows and arrows tucked under their arms, and over their shoulders they carried nets filled with skins and knives and fire-making tools, beads, cordage, and perhaps ceremonial regalia.
This is a clapper stick. The Rumsen were very musical, and it was used in place of a drum along with when they were singing their traditional songs. Look, it's hollow in the middle. And there's this cool plant we're going to show you called an elderberry. Yellow flowers and berries, and this is what it sounds like.
First recorded accounts of the mouth of the Carmel River was a scene that was written about on the Portola expedition. And grizzly bears were feeding on the beach. They were feeding on whales.
When the Native Americans were the only people living here, there was far more wildlife than there is today, and many more animals than there were people. One of the animals that is no longer with us today is the grizzly bear. We have a skull, and it's huge. Look, in relation to my hand, the size of that skull. It's absolutely massive, and compare that to the size of a black bear skull. We do have black bears here now. They came after the grizzly bears were all hunted.
So we brought you to the Pacific Grove Museum of Natural History to see their rich resources. And here is one of our favorites, the California grizzly bear. And you can see how big it is.
This grizzly bear, would you have liked to have run into this while you were out collecting acorns or berries or fish in the streams? Because that was the biggest danger of being a Rumsen, is you could run into one of these guys any day.
The mountain lion, another animal you might be wary of as you were wandering around if you were a Rumsen.
You've probably all seen our black-tailed mule deer, and here's a skull right next to the black bear.
There were herds of them, Throughout the meadows, the Native Americans practiced fire to get rid of the brush and encourage the grazing land for these grazing animals.
From what I've heard, far more common than the mule deer, and that was the Thule elk and the pronghorn antelope.
They ate virtually everything from all of the different mammals on the land and on the sea, except one of the mammals that they did not eat was the skunk, for obvious reasons. Many tribes did not eat the coyote because they believed the coyote was their ancestors. The Pacific Grove Museum of Natural History has this amazing collection of birds, and we brought you here and we're gonna try to find the eagle.
So you can see there's so many different kinds of birds. There are shorebirds, large and small, many shorebirds. There are waterfowl such as ducks and geese. And then we have our forest birds like our woodpecker, and our cowbirds like our turkeys. And then we have our raptors, our hunting birds, our hawks and owls, and the eagle. What they didn't eat was the eagle. Why so special when they ate everything else? It's because it was a spiritual creature to them. All right, the Rumsen had their own language, and their language was spoken by a few different tribes in the area. Their language sounded really different from ours, and we're fortunate that we have a few words of the animals that help us practice how they said things. So we've talked a little bit about grizzly bears. We don't have any, but they were very common and very dangerous. And the word for grizzly bear was orish. The black-tailed mule deer were one of the most important animals for the Rumsen, and the word for deer was toche. There's even a place on the Santa Lucia Preserve called Toche. You see this beautiful red head. The name for the acorn woodpecker was churroot. And they used the feathers, the red feathers, in some of their decorative baskets.
Made from seagrass. So you have to weave, you have to tie the seagrass and then weave multiple pieces together to make sure that it was strong enough to hold the boat. Hello, and welcome to the Discovery Center at Palo Corona Regional Park. We're excited that you can be here to share in our wonderful resources. I'm next to a Thule Boat that was made by Linda Yamani, a local Rumsen historian. So this boat was made just for the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District. Linda harvested the Thules from a local park using volunteers. Then she spent a long time drying it. I think it was about 4 months. Once she dried it, then she had to bundle them. You'll see that they're in big groups. There's 5 bundles here so that it would be water safe when they traveled in the water.
Kids, look at the paddle. Some of you have been kayaking out on the Monterey Bay. This is like the original kayak paddle.
This one is a small size. It might have been good for maybe a woman and a child or a single person. Some of the other boats were larger for 2 people at a time.
Stephen Powers, a 19th century ethnologist, described the California Indians as almost amphibious. They are always splashing in the water, he noted. Water was everywhere, and it was teeming with life. From the water, the Rumsen gathered an immense harvest of fish and waterfowl. So the incredible diversity of life in central coastal California meant that these people didn't have to expand their range. They stayed in this range from Moss Landing out to Carmel Valley and down to Big Sur their whole life. Shell middens are found along the coast and contain fragments of shells from abalones and mussels and other shellfish, and bones from marine mammals, land mammals, and birds. Ohlone loved to trade, and there were extensive networks of trails and trade routes that crisscrossed the entire state through Oregon and the Pacific Northwest, trails that crossed the Central Valley to the Sierras and beyond the Great Basin.
So what did they trade? Here on the coast, the Rumsians had acorns, they had dried shellfish, they had shells that they made into money and were used to decorate baskets and other things, and they had salt.
Any kind of food, meat, anything from the sea, otter fur, sea lion pelts. They traded for obsidian.
When the Spanish came about 250 years ago, things began to change for my Rumsen ancestors, and not in a good way. At the mission, many Indian people died from new diseases, which caused a lot of sadness. And the foods available at the mission weren't as healthy as the diet they had hunted and gathered from nature. Over the generations, many of the old ways of doing things were forgotten, but lots of Rumsen people, like myself, are still here today, remembering our grandmothers and grandfathers of the past. I've spent more than 35 years of my life finding those old ways and learning how to make some of the beautiful things made by my ancestors so long ago. I've spent the past 25 years learning to make baskets from native plants in the tradition of my ancestors. Very few of our baskets survived, but through research and lots of hard work, I've been creating new baskets, bringing them back into the world again. My ancestors lived here for thousands of years, and in my imagination, I can see the children playing, women weaving baskets or preparing acorn for a coming meal, and men repairing nets or returning from a hunt. I feel a deep sense of connection to this land, and honored to be part of its long history. Without these plants, there can be no baskets, and it has taken me many years to find the few places where I can actually get them. After harvesting, I thank the plants and the land, sometimes silently, sometimes with words, and sometimes with a special song.
Thank you for coming with us on this journey back in time. We can't wait to take you on a live walk to learn more about Native American use of plants.
So when you guys come on a live Zoom walk, we're going to walk where the Native Americans lived, near the village of Takutnut, and we're going to look at special plants and talk about how they took that plant and turned it into something they had to have to survive.
Bye now.
See you guys soon.
Hui hui shoo-doo-doo, hui hui da mi sich, hui hui da shoo-doo-doo, hui hui shoo-doo-doo, hui hui da mi sich, hui hui da shoo-doo-doo.